I want to read something to this camera. It is about a book, and the book is here. It's Joan of Arc, Mark Twain. And it's a really nice, well cared for book, and I paid £8.50 for it, but that's another story. Personal Recollections of Joan of Arc by the Sir Louis de Conte, her page and secretary, freely translated out of the ancient French into modern English from the original unpublished manuscript in the National Archives of France by Jean-François Audin, edited by Mark Twain. London, Chateau Windus, Piccadilly, 1896. Copyright 1896 by Harper & Brothers, New York, USA, all rights reserved. So this copy is contemporary 1896, but it's the United Kingdom copy. The dedication is to Olivia Langdon Clemens. This book is tendered on our wedding anniversary in grateful recognition of her 25 years of valued service as my literary agent and editor, the author. So he considers himself the author there. Consider this unique and imposing distinction. Since the writing of human history began, Joan of Arc is the only person of either sexes who has held supreme command of military force of her nation at the age of 16. That was Louis Cousteau. Their authorities examining verification of the truthfulness of this narrative, G. Cacheret, G. Fabre, H. A. Wallon, M. Sepe, G. Michelet, Perrier de Saint-Brie, La Comtesse de Charbonnon, Monsieur Ricard, Lord Relgower, John Hagan, Janet Tuckey. Translator's preface. This is what I wanted to read. Now the translator, I'll come to this in a minute, but I found this interesting because I really enjoyed the preface, a bit like Matthew 23 in the Bible. But I want to read it. To arrive at a just estimate of a renowned man's character, one must judge it by the standards of his time and not ours. Judged by the standards of one century, the noblest characters of an earlier one lose much of their lustre. Judged by the standards of today, there is probably no illustrious man of 4 or 5 centuries ago whose character could meet the test at all points. But the character of Joan of Arc is unique. It can be measured by the standards of all times without misgiving or apprehension as to the result. Judged by any of them, judged by all of them, it is still flawless, it is still ideally perfect. It still occupies the loftiest place possible to human attainment, a loftier one than has been reached by any other mere mortal. When we reflect that her century was the brutalest, the wickedest, the rottenest in history since the darkest ages, we are lost in a wonder at the miracle of such a product from such a soil. The contrast between her and her century is the contrast between day and night. She was truthful when lying was the common speech of men. She was honest when honesty was become a lost virtue. She was a keeper of promises when the keeping of promises was expected of no one. She gave her great mind to great thoughts and great purposes when other great minds wasted themselves upon pretty fancies or upon poor ambitions. She was modest and fine and delicate when to be loud and coarse might be said to be universal. She was full of pity when a merciless cruelty was the rule. She was steadfast when stability was unknown and honourable in an age which had forgotten what honour was. She was a rock of convictions in a time when men believed in nothing and scoffed at all things. She was unfailingly true in an age that was false to the core. She maintained her personal dignity unimpaired in an age of fawnings and civilities. She was of dauntless courage when hope and courage had perished in the hearts of her nation. She was spotlessly pure in mind and body when society in the highest places was foul in both. She was all these things in an age where crime was the common business of lords and princes, and when the highest personages in Christendom were able to astonish even this infamous era and make it stand aghast at the spectacle of their atrocious lives, black with unimaginable treacheries, butcheries, and bestialities. She was, perhaps, the only entirely unselfish person who has a name, has a place in profane history. No vestige or suggestion of self-seeking can be found in any word or deed of hers. When she had rescued her king from his vagabondage and set his crown upon his head, she was offered rewards and honours, but she refused them all and would take nothing. All she would take for herself, if the king would grant it, was leave to go back to her village home and tend her sheep again, and feel her mother's arms around her, and be her housemaid and helper. This selfishness of this unspoiled general of victorious armies and companion of princes and idol of an applauding and grateful nation reached but this far and no further. The work wrought by Joan of Arc was fairly regarded as ranking with any recorded in history when one considers the conditions under which it was undertaken, the obstacles in the way and the means at her disposal. Caesar carried conquest far, but he did so with the trained and confident veterans of Rome and was a trained soldier himself. and Napoleon swept away the disciplined armies of Europe, but he also was a trained soldier, and he began his work with patriot battalions inflamed and inspired by the miracle-working new breath of liberty breathed upon them by the Revolution. Eager young apprentices to the splendid trade of war, not old and broken men-at-arms, despairing survivors of an age-long accumulation of monotonous defeats. But Joan of Arc, as a mere child in years, ignorant, unlettered, a poor village girl, unknown and without influence, found a great nation lying in chains. Helpless and hopeless under an alien dominations, its treasuries bankrupt, its soldiers disheartened and dispersed, and all spirit torpid, all courage dead in the hearts of the people, through long years of foreign and domestic outrage and oppression, their king cowed, resigned to its fate, and preparing to flee the country. And she laid her hand upon this nation, this corpse, and it rose and followed her. She led it from victory to victory. She turned back the tide of the 100 Years' War. She fatally crippled the English power and died with the earned title of Deliverer of France, which she bears to this day. For all reward, the French king whom she had crowned stood supine, or is it supine? I think supine, and indifferent, while French priests took the noble child, the most innocent, the most lovely, the most adorable the ages had produced, and burned her alive at the stake. A peculiarity of Joan of Arc's history, the details of the life of Joan of Arc form a bibliography or biography which is unique among the world's biographies in one respect. It's the only story of human life which comes to us under oath, the only one which comes to us from the witness stand. The official records of the great trial of 1431 and the process of rehabilitation of a quarter of a century later are still preserved in the National Archives of France, and they furnish with remarkable fullness the facts of her life. The history of no other life of that remote time is known with either the certainty or the comprehensiveness that attaches to hers. The Sieur de Conte is faithful to her official history in his personal recollections, and thus far his trustworthiness is unimpeachable, but his mass of added particulars must depend for credit upon his own word alone, the translator. So the preface, the translator's preface. Now we have an issue about the language, because the language is very patriotic, it's very romantic. It is not, as I first thought, the work of Mark Twain. I believe it is the translator Jean-Francois Audin, edited by Mark Twain. But the funny thing is, to my wife Olivia Langdon Clemens, the author, so it's a bit confusing. But that book is 1896, which is when it was first published in the United States, and I think I paid about £5 for it. But I found it to be an amazingly interesting preface, one of the best prefaces I've ever read. But I was instantly reminded of the Virgin Mary, and I thought as a Frenchman that the Virgin Mary would have appeared somewhere in a sort of a comparison. To use the superlative with Joan of Arc, I find to be bizarre. But I did think of the nature of the Virgin Mary and the nature of Jesus, and the nature of Mary not being treated as well as she should have been, and the nature of Jesus possibly being godlike and being treated in a way that wasn't really fair, given that he was God and he could do pretty much what he wanted anyway. It was more to do with Mary being this wonderful, pure and innocent being who was then treated badly. And I found there was a certain analogy there. And I have 2 copies of this book. The first copy I found in a bookshop. I was living on £20 a week. I'd been teaching in London for 3 years. I was about £4,000 in debt, and I was paying it back while on job seeker's allowance, and I couldn't find work anywhere doing anything. So by the time I paid my £100 a month back to pay for the debt while teaching in London and living in a bedsit, I was still living in a bedsit, but I was left with £20 a week. But I found this work, Joan of Arc by Mark Twain, and it was £8.50. So the first time I thought, well, I can't afford it. Went back again, I really like it, can't afford it. Went back a third time, thought it was gone, up in the far corner of the shelf, and I thought, I really want to have it. So out of my £20 a week, I paid £8.50 for it, and I think it's one of the best prefaces I've ever come across. And I just thought I'd like to make a note of it. Thank you for listening.